My name is Ali Mansouri. I'm a PhD student in interdisciplinary theater studies at UW-Madison. After hearing that, one of the questions people usually ask me in the US is that, is there a theater in Iran? And so after being asked this question multiple times, I came to the realization that there are two distinct groups that are asking me the same questions. The first group is those who cannot believe that in a country with a religious and authoritarian government, there might be a theater, an art form as theater, a dialogue-based art, which by cherishing the clash of ideas is one of the foundations of democracy. The second group is those who take for granted the existence of theater in every corner of the world and are more interested in knowing whether any theatrical forms can be introduced as the Iranian theater tradition. My answer to both groups is positive. We have had an active theater in Iran during the dictatorial periods, both before and after the 1979 revolution, and also there is something called Iranian theater that is result of evolution of different traditions over thousands of years in the Iranian plateau. Today I will focus less on the contemporary theater in Iran and more on the introducing some traditional methods that, in the face of acceleration of today's life, seems closer to their extinction than ever before. So here, whenever I'm talking about the Iranian theater, I mean those traditional forms. So there are some differences and similarities between the Iranian theater and its Western counterpart. The main one is that both forms result from the rituals. As we know, ancient Greeks, by changing the shape of ritual of some ceremonies for a god called Dionysus, created a form of playwriting and theatrical performance, which is still the primary model of Western theater. Some theatrical forms in Iran, such as Taziyeh, have followed a similar path, although, as we will see, they have never distanced themselves from their spiritual and religious goals. The main difference between the Iranian theater and its Western peer is its distance and lack of connection with literature. Since 2,500 years ago, a form of literature as drama has been considered the central pillar of Western theater. In contrast, traditional performing artists in Iran have always been relied on improvisation and oral transmission of the performance tradition. This dependence on verbal communication is one of the reasons these forms, especially in the last 100 years, have not only disappeared but have been forgotten and eliminated. Another reason for Iranian theatrical forms' gradual deterioration is that most of them depended on other places other than theater. Until modern era, their Iranian plays never had an auditorium or a specific place, and their performers always used other places to present their work, such as coffee houses, bazaars, and village squares. And with a widespread turn to urbanization and emergence of big cities, these places were removed, and as a result, many traditional performances lost their historical locations. One of the essential performance traditions in Iran is Naqqāli, a one-person performance in which Naqqāl, the performer narrator, narrates an event or story in a poetry or prose in front of a group of spectators with dramatic gestures and tone. Of course, this form of performance is not unique to Iran, and there are shapes of it in other lectures and countries. It is believed that before the arrival of Islam, Naqqāls used to tell the stories with some musical instruments However, after Islam and banning of music in some periods, Naqqālis were forced to rely solely on their acting art to tell the stories. I will try to play this one. No, it's not possible, so I have to change. Or maybe. No.
ساقی سیمساق جام برقای بریون کرده اسفندیار نشسته یه نامه نوشت بفرمو تا بهمن آمد به پیش سخن ران بابن ز اندازه بیش به دوغ و اسب سیاه برنشین بیارای تن را به دیبای چین از این خان تا خان رستم بران این نامه را بده رستم. بهمن نامه را گرفت با پشوتن ترک 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 رسیدن اول قرآن این بستن دهنه به دهنه یاره گفتن ببینیم تو اهل کجایی؟ تو اهل زابا. تو این جوان پهلوان ایران رستم کجاست؟ این کشاورزه گفت تو چمن خانبالو. سر اسب بهمن و پشوتن برگشت اومدن بالان پایین دیدن یه نفر منو نگاه کنی لمه داده میاد تو همدق بلا. رستم هر وقت گرسنش میشد یه هندویج سوسیس میخورد. بهمن به پشوتن گفت چنین گفت بهمن که این رستم است و یا آفتاب سپید دم است بترسم که با او یل اسفندیار بتابد سر از کارزار من او را به یک سنگ بیجان کنم. آره من او را به یک سنگ بیجان کنم دل زال رودابه پیچان کنم. نیزر انداختن زیر یه صخره سنگ. رستم هم اینطور لمه داده فرامرز اون بر زوارون بر چند زابلی رخشم چرا میکنه. همین که اینطوری رستم لمه داده بود سنگ رها کردن طرف ز نخچیرگاهش زواره بدید. چنین گفت که ای پهلوان سوار یکی سنگ غلطان شد از کوسار. اینجاش قشنگه سنگ داره میاد اینجای رستم. حکیم میگه نه جنبید رستم نه بنهاد گفت زواره بر او آفرین کرد زود بدد تاش سنگ انداخت دور 10 متر سنگ پرتش کرد. بهمن به پشوتن گفت
we can consider these narrators as the custodians of ancient myth and legends who, in the absence of literature-based technologies such as books and papers, and also in the absence of literate audiences, were responsible for transmitting the ancient beliefs and imaginations of the past to the next generations. Interestingly, the Book of Shahnameh, which was a part of, which was the source of the performance that we saw, written based on verbal narratives of storytellers, and then became one of the primary sources for performing Naqqāls in the following centuries. During 1,000 years after Shahnameh was written by Ferdowsi, the narration of the adventures of its heroes in the form of Naqqāli has been attractive to the Iranians. As it is said, the audiences were so touched by the stories that were either left the venues before their favorite heroes were killed, or sometimes they paid money to Naqqāls to prevent their heroes from death. So let me show you another different kind of Naqqāli, which is Ferdowsi Khani.
بناهای آباد گردد خراب ز باران از تابش آفتاب پیفکندم از نظم کاخی بلند که از باد و باران نیابد گزند بر این نامور عمرها بگذرد بخواند هر آن کس که دارد خرد همه کارهای جهان را در است مگر مرگ را کان در دیگر است ایرج به دست دو برادرش کشته میشه و اکنون نوه او هست که به انتقام پدر بزرگ میره به سراغ اون دو عموی بزرگتر خودش و انتقام میگیره با کمک فریدون بزرگ پدر بزرگ. بدانگه که روشن جهان تیره گشت طلایه پراکند بر گرد دشت خروشی برآمد ز پیش سپاه که ای نامداران و شیران شاه بدانید که این جنگ اهریمن است همان روز جنگ است و چین جستن است میان بسته دار.
After the Safavid era and the officialization of Shiaism in Iran, religious epics gradually became one of the subjects of this kind of performances, and Naqqāls turned to narrating events about Shia icons. These performances had two general forms. One was Hamle Khani, during which parts of a book, Hamle Haydari, was narrated. This book, written by Mirza Muhammad Rafi Bazeh, included parts of the life of the Prophet of Islam and Hazrat Ali, the first Imam of Shias, and their religious wars. Another form, which is still alive and more popular among the religious narrators, is called Roza Khani, in which events related to martyrdom of Imam Hussein, the third Imam of Shias, and his companions in Karbala war are performed often in religious ceremonies related to Shia's mourning during Muharram. The basis of this performance is a book called Rozatu Shohada, written by Hossein Vaez Kashfi in 16th century, which is basically a distorted narrative of the historical battle of Imam Hussein with army of Yazid, the ruler of his time. Another form of narration in which both religious and mythical stories are narrated is Parde Khani, in which the performer narrates different chapters of the life of one of the religious or mythical characters by using a painted screen or canvas. In these painted screens, the faces of religious figures such as Shia Imams and prophets are depicted in a hollow of light because the religious barriers do not allow their faces to be depicted.
این کلام آقا حسین بن علی بود به خاطر همین گفت من زیر باب ذلت نمیرم اما قره ابن یزید ریاحی چه کرد؟ قره ابن یزید ریاحی اومد جلو یبن خیر المرسلین آتش زدی بر پیکرم بی سبب بردی در این هنگام نام مادرم گر کسی میبرد نام مادر شهریار پاره میکردم تنش را من به تیغ آب داد اما مادر تو فاطمه بنت رسول اطهر است بهترین خلق عالم زوج پاک که میدونی مادر حسین کیه پس به چه علت اومدی درون حسین رو سر کرده؟
The story of the killing of the third Shia Imam and his companions in Karbala is also subject of another form of theater, which is the most famous tradition in Iran, which is called Taziyeh. However, the history of this ritual performance goes beyond Islam and even the Christianity, as it is appeared from historical evidence and documents. Iranians celebrated the death of a mythical character named Siavash in a ritual called Subashun. One of the paintings left from this ceremony dates back more than 2,000 years ago. However, Taziyeh in the form that has reached us today is the result of 1,000 years of changes and transformation in its form, which cannot be addressed in this short time. For this reason, I will only focus on its current form. The most important thing we should know about Taziyeh is that this theatrical form, in the first place, does not have an entertaining aspect for its audience, nor does it have an aspect of livelihood or even aesthetic goals for its performance. All those connected with Taziyeh, both the spectators and performers, consider it a kind of religious activity and a part of commemorating the martyrdom of the third Shia Imam in the days of Muharram. In the first days of the Arabic month of Muharram, especially the anniversary of the historical battle on the 9th and 10th day, different parts of the story of Karbala martyrs are performed by Taziyeh actors. Actors in Taziyeh are divided in two categories. Some who play the role of Imam Hussein's relatives and companions, who are called Mu'alif Khan or Awliyas. These are often distinguished from the others with green and white clothes. The other group, called Mukhalif Khan or Ashqiya, which literally means the villains, wears red and black clothes and are enemies of Imam Hussein. The exciting thing about Ashqiya's performance is, in their words, they curse themselves and sanctify those they are fighting. They may cry many times and interrupt their performance. In this way, they remind the audience that in reality they are not the enemies of the good forces of the show, but they are merely playing the role. Acting in Taziyeh is not an artistic profession, as I told before, but a religious practice often passed down to family members. The acting style in Taziyeh is influenced mainly by acting style of Naqqāls, in which we discussed earlier. The army of the good actors sing with beautiful voices, similar to narration of the narration style of religious Naqqāls, and each chooses different musical pitches depending on their role. However, the evil army actors speak harshly and are more similar to the narrators of the epic Naqqāli.
نه در دیار حبش پی به ملک هندوستان کنید و طالبت این شاه فرا کنید مگر به کار به یک کار اختیار کنید امی عبدالله اول به بیعت ابن سیاد و حب یقین و کرنه کشته شوی ای شهدتان نامی ای
Because the actors sing during the tazia, many people talk about it. Name it as the Iranian opera, because they sing instead of talking. So in some cities there are fixed places for tazia, but in most places the stage for performing tazia is set up only for during the days of Muharram. The tazia stage is a round platform on which sometimes actors play. Sometimes they play war scenes on horseback around the platform. Spectators also gather around the stage and watch with tears the representation of the bitter events that happened to their saints. The dialogues and monologues of the characters are based on the text written by often anonymous tazia writers who did not consider their writings as works of literature, and there has always been a religious intention behind the effort to narrate the various aspects of the life of the Karbala martyrs. خیلی چیزم هست مناسب ایام هست because we are in middle of Muharram days, so this shows are going on right now in Iran. The history of appearance of puppet shows in Iran is not very clear like the rest of the theatrical forms in this country. However, based on the similarities between the tradition of puppetry in Iran and countries such as China, Turkey, and India, it can be considered one of the products of cultural exchanges between Iran and its neighboring countries. What we can be sure, due to numerous references to puppetry in literary works, is the long history of puppet shows in Iran. One of the most famous of these works is a poem by Khayyam, one of the famous Iranian poets who lived about 1,000 years ago. He writes ما لعبتکانی مفلک لعبت باز از روی حقیقتی و نه از روی مجاز یک چند در این بساط بازی کردیم رفتیم به صندوق عدم یک یک باز. In general, there are two different style of puppet shows in Iran. The first method is a shadow play, similar to the same traditions in China, Turkey, and many other countries. Shadow puppets made of transparent but colored material are placed behind a white curtain, and when the light shines on their back, their image is visible to the audience on the other side of the curtain. Unfortunately, I couldn't find any traditional shadow plays, but I found an interesting one, which is a new adaptation of shadow plays, and an Iranian director made this show in United States. Another form of puppetry in Iran is marionette plays, which are among the most popular entertainment folklore plays, and like many other folk plays around the world, include fixed characters, many of whose names are still familiar to Iranians. One of the most famous one is Pahlevan Kachal, which there are several different stories about its originating point. In some of these marionette plays, the master puppeteer enters into dialogue with the puppet that talks in a funny way. The puppet, who has drawn ideas about the events around him, make the audience laugh, and the puppeteer tries to correct its mistake in a fun interaction and prescribe solutions for the problems that the puppet has encountered.
دنیا چی داره؟ هیچی نداریم؟ هر چی بخواد داره. تیاره خانم آپارتمان بخواید داره، ویلا بخواید داره، خونه هم داره، اتومبیل موبیل هم داره، باغ هم داره. از مال دنیا تیاره خانم شما رو بی نیاز تیاره خانم کار تمومه. همون که میخواستی گیرت اومده. باغ داره، حیات داره، ویلا داره، ماشین داره. توجه کردی؟ زر و زیور و طلا گفت همون چرا که باید و شاید اینقدر برات میخرم تا از مال دنیا بی نیاز بشی. جان بابا چیکار کنم؟ خیلی خوب. میخوای امتحانش کنی؟ خیلی خوب خیلی خوب خیلی خوب. بسیار خوب. الان شما سب کن. وقتی که شما رفتی بشارت اومد میگن تیاره خانم رفتن گرمابه لباس عروسی رو بپوشن. شما هم برنامه عروسی رو
I know
تا تیاره خانم
Yeah, I know.
Is this something that is performed in front of an audience, or is just for a television show?
No, it's for audience.
Oh,
Yeah, it's in front of
It's
audience.
very small, and I don't know.
I mean,
how big.
this is part of a documentary. Maybe this guy is performing it for the documentary makers,
Oh, yeah,
but
okay.
I've seen the same show in other videos that's
there are
performing
some
for
people.
the audiences. I wish I could play it from the presentation files. It was pointed out that the lack of specific performing places had brought the performances to workplaces and people's lives. One of these popular types of shows we know from historical documents was comic plays that were performed sometimes in coffee houses and sometimes at people's places since 18th century. The performers of this form of plays, usually members of entertaining groups, گروه‌های مطربی، دسته‌های مطربی. It's the word that I found. I translated مطرب into entertaining groups. Perform series of dances and songs and short pieces of funny shows for events such as weddings. All these shows were performed without takes and only based on improvisation. Among these shows, two specific forms found their independent identities, Kachalak Bazi and Baqqāl Bazi. One of the most famous Kachalak Bazi plays, whose story has survived in the folk literature of Iran, is the story of a poor young man named Hassan Kachal, who fell in love with the daughter of a wealthy merchant, and every time he went to propose to her, he quarreled with her money-loving father. Bahram Beyzai, an Iranian researcher and playwright, believed that people's superficial corruption was shown and criticized in this plays. Baqqāl Bazi was another comic form in which a greedy and perhaps a religious grocer known as Haji had a forgetful and lazy servant named Nowruz, who executed the orders of his master in the opposite and wrong way, creating funny situations. The master-servant relationship of this play, which probably arose from the feudal system of that time, was repeated many times later in Iranian comic shows, leading to the creation of one of Iran's most popular form of theater, Siyah Bazi, and one of the most popular theatrical characters named Mubarak, a character who, with complete simplicity and boldness, exposes the lies he saw. Sometimes in the middle of his funny words, he uttered painful words that were the words of the underdogs in the society. According to researchers such as Beyzai, one of the reasons for people's interest in these shows was the sharp criticisms made toward nobles. One of the most exciting things about the comic plays is the thematic similarities between them and the European commedia dell'arte. Who knows, maybe sometimes somewhere there was an exchange between the traveling theater groups. Let's not forget that Iran, in the neighborhood of the Ottoman Empire and also as a part of the Silk Road, was always in exchange between other cultures and nations. So, from the beginning of the 20th century, many obstacles appeared in front of Iranian traditional theatrical forms and endangered their existence. The first danger related to the change in the lifestyle of people by turning to living in big cities and finding alternative forms of entertainment such as radio, television, and of course Western theater. There was no place left for traditional performances in new way of life. Coffee houses and local markets gradually lost their identity as the central meeting place for people. Although Western-style theaters were established in the cities, traditional plays had less chance to enter them. Additionally, before and after the Islamic Revolution, rulers' policies made the traditional performers face many restrictions. During the Pahlavi era, emphasis of the last two Shahs of Iran on Western modernization pushed traditional performances to sidelines. During this period, traditional forms such as taziyeh were banned. In the post-Islamic Revolution era, although theatrical forms such as taziyeh were revived due to their religious content, but the prohibitions caused other forms, which included music and dance, to face severe restrictions. Nevertheless, many artists have tried all these years to record what was left from the memories of the previous generations and create works with the treasures that came to them. The most influential artist who has dedicated a significant part of his life to recording and reintroducing this tradition is Bahram Beyzai, whom I mentioned a couple of times before, an artist researcher who, in addition to writing one of the most essential books on the history of theater in Iran, has written and directed many plays inspired by these traditions. Beyzai, whom some call the Shakespeare of Iran, wrote a play called The Death of Yazgird a year before the revolution. And considering the difficulties that existed during those days, he decided to record it in a form of a movie. A film that fortunately can be seen on YouTube today, albeit with not a very good quality. The interesting point in this play is the use of acting techniques inspired by Naqqālis.
شنیدم که مردمان در نام خرمدش کنند و پیشواز برای پادشاهی که در سرزمین خویش می‌گریزد بزرگان چه گفتند؟
سخن بزرگی نگفتند.
من گریزم در سرزمین خویش خانه به خانه می‌روم و همه جا می‌دانم سفره‌ای نیست که مرا مهمان کند و رفت خوابی نه که در آن دم بیاسایم. بیچاران خود در حال گریزند. اسباب رخمار به جایان که مرا به سوی کشور برانند از آن جدا شدند.
چه جاوه به هم میبافی؟ تو ژنده پوش ما را بازی مده. این همه ناله که تو داری برای آن است که نپرسیم بر سر خداوندان ایزد چه آمدی. البته یکی وردی کن شوهر من دستنگ و بچه‌دار. این نانی که خورده ای را به تو میبخشم اگر زودتر روانه شوی.
با کدام اسب و من کجا را دارم؟ درهای دنیا به روی من بسته است.
So in recent years, Beyzai, like many other Iranian artists, has preferred to continue his activities outside of Iran due to the restrictions in the country. And he has been teaching at Stanford University, where he has staged several shows such as Tarabnameh, in the style of traditional plays. This one is a good example of what how the comic plays look.
مدعی در خرد هر می‌رود نقمه این تقصوی در پرتاب کن جشن شادیتان مبارک بر شما هان به شادی این جهان شاداب کن داری 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 شبان شبان شکر خدا شبان شبان شکر خدا شب مرتب شادی عروس و داماد که رفتیم بستر آقا.
Among the younger artists, people like Afshin Hashemi try to stage what can be attractive to today's audiences by using traditions of Iranian entertainers or mutrebs.
به خدا از اندوه چشما اندوهگین تو با این ذوق و روح نباید بشیمندی وای ابراه به ما رسیدی سیر ماروزان از طلا جواهر بگیر تا تاباله و سرگین تا شستگان خلقان شکام ما هست فلک بیشتر میرزه تو شاهد ما که مخلطه نشدیم ایشون چی عرض کردن این چیزا چرا به ناسازگارم چرا به ناسازگارم چرا به من سازگارم
It's clear that one cannot stay in the past, and in the forward movement of history, every tradition undergoes changes and transformations. There's no doubt that preserving beloved traditions in the face of inevitable change is a remarkable achievement, particularly for those who refuse to be held back by the narrow-mindedness and limitations imposed on them. Passing these traditions to future generations is an influential endeavor that can shape the future of our cultures. Thank you. If there is any questions or anything that you think I could talk about but I forgot to, you can.
Yeah, that was amazing.
Thank you.
I had heard a lot of these terms, but I didn't know what is what. So, a good review.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I have a question about the circulation of Shahnameh. Like as you said, it underwent a circulation from oral tradition to written text, and then come back to oral tradition like Naqqāli. But I remember that in the preface of the English translation of Shahnameh, I'm not sure whether the argument is like correct or not, because the editor put like Ferdowsi combined both oral tradition and written text when he composed Shahnameh. But according to like our today's edition of Shahnameh, like the Mutlaq edition, is it kind of influenced by the oral transmission in the past?
So before Ferdowsi writing his book, there was another Shahnameh which is called Shahnameh Abu Mansour, Shahnameh Abu Mansouri. And the reason is that a king called Abu Mansour, I don't remember his full name, he gathered some peoples who were called Dehqans. Dehqans were those people who knew the stories of the past, who knew the history. So the stories, as you know, in Ferdowsi's Shahnameh are both historical events and imaginations of different people. The Abu Mansur, Shahnameh Abu Mansur, is in prose, and they gathered 4 of the most popular and famous Dehqans of that time, and they asked them the stories, and someone wrote all those stories. And then Ferdowsi used that book and also other narratives, other stories, and also his own imagination, because the stories that we read in Ferdowsi's book are very different from other narrations, from other versions of the stories that we have. He also changed them with his own imagination, and that's interesting, because also Naqqāli, the performers, the narrators of Shahnameh, also changed the stories, some not the whole story, but they add some details depending on when and where they were performing it.
So like after the composition of Shahnameh, like so till now the earliest edition of Shahnameh is Florence manuscript.
So you're talking about
like I don't
yeah,
know.
the published books of Shahnameh after, yeah.
Yeah, like is it possible that some details of Shahnameh was changed after, I mean, its composition?
Yeah, it's possible because
Like, when people
there are people like Jalal Khaliqi Mutlaq. He is very famous for his research on Shahnameh, and he also has an edition of Shahnameh. Some people say it is the most exact edition of Shahnameh, and he found a lot of parts of the Shahnameh which are added after the death of Ferdowsi. Okay.
All right. In the interest of time, we have the room for a couple more minutes, so maybe one or two more questions, and then.
Hi, I have a question. I'm Ariana. I'm خیلی ممنون عالی بود. My question is, you were talking during the Pahlavi era, there was kind of a suppression of the more Islamic forms of the theater. And kind of based on what I know, Pahlavi era, they really emphasized Shahnameh and this idea of like Iranian nationalism pre-Islam. So did you see like an inverse relationship where the Shah was maybe promoting more of those like Shahnameh type theatrical
I don't think so, because if it was the case, people like Beyzai and other would say, I know, especially during the last Shah era, and especially during those years that Farah was his queen, she was promoting art, the Iranian art and modern art, and she was trying to gather a lot of people she invited, she that's one of the things that nobody knows. She invited the most famous people, the avant-garde artists in a festival called Jashn Honar Shiraz. It was in Shiraz, and people like Robert Wilson made his created his most avant-garde piece in Iran. People like Grotowski, Peter Brook, and many other, they were invited personally by the Queen of Iran. And yeah, that was amazing. That's an amazing time, and many of the modern Iranian artists flourished during those days. But it was not very good time for some traditions, because we can talk a lot about why they didn't let Taziyeh or other religious performances be more free to be on stage. But yeah, those days were not good for Taziyeh performance.
Sorry, I have a last question about women's participation in Iranian theater.
Awesome.
As we just watched a movie clip about Taziyeh, women only participated when they were like minor roles.
So women, as far as I know, women never women are not allowed to participate in religious plays like Taziyeh, and even in many of the other kind of performances like comic plays, there were men who were pretending to be women, and it was during the Pahlavi era that the actresses, the women performers were added to the stage in Iran. And it was not a very good thing for people. They didn't like that. They didn't have a very good idea, good opinion about a woman who was on stage because of the religious beliefs.
Well, I don't have a question, but I have a few comments. Absolutely fascinating connections with India all through, with everything, including, there's a community of Naqqāls in Punjab. The word tazia or taziye in India means actually processions with very elaborate paper structures. So it's not a form of performance, but it's an event on one particular day of Muharram. And only men participate, but it's a day-long sort of event. And the tazia is the structure and not a performance. And then, of course, the whole tension between the pre-Islamic and the Islamic and the post-revolution and so on. So we'll at some point we'll have a conversation about this.
What do you think about Iran's modern theater, like the performances that are going on today in Iran? Some of them are about European stories. What's your opinion of that in comparison to what you discussed?
So, because I just left the country not many long ago, I can talk a lot about the situation. But from my own experience, why people choose more Western pieces is because of the censorship. When you talk about other countries, it's not very dangerous. So many time I'm also write plays. I prefer to write about imaginary countries, imaginary societies, other than Iran. The play was about Iran, but it was in a country in other places, because in that way you could just find an answer to the people who you were asked to explain your pieces. Yeah, people would, but I mean, the situation is not good. There are a lot of restrictions, but the artists are doing their jobs. And right now, after the last year's protests, many people say they won't go on stage with the obligatory hijab, and what they found that their solution was to perform underground pieces. So they, instead of putting a piece on a stage for a month, they just get a place for a day, for a night, and they perform, and everyone knows that they are going to see a piece that is going to be on stage just for once. They go see the play and then never think it's not going to happen again. Or some people will put their plays, performer plays in their homes, in their apartments, which is not a new thing.
Do you think it's kind of like going backwards to the time where like people wouldn't go to stage but like perform in coffee shops and places? Does it seem like it's going in that direction?
I'm not sure. we should see what will happen. I hope in near future many plays without any restrictions will be allowed to be on stage.
Great job, thank you.
Thank you. خیلی ممنون.
Thank you.
متشکرم از همه.